Yeah, I could have emailed him, couldn't I? But someone decides to keep sending spam through my email account, so I'll go straight to junk, so no one responds. So I have to invite people by paper airplane. Cheers, Kat. Call them up. No, I don't like talking on the phone. Hope to God that they get there. I'm not going to hope to God. I'm not going to, put my faith in that. I'm going to put my faith in something much stronger than that, Kat. Video editing. Yeah, they'll get there. Don't worry.
Johnny, you prick. Make me a Big Bots Bash video for YouTube, or else Hugs and Kisses Bill Make Stuff. Rude. Hi everyone, I'm Johnny Fraser-Allen, and Bill Make Stuff has asked me to do a Big Bot Bash. So a bit of backstory to what I'm going to be doing here today. Since COVID, I've spent the last 5 years building and replicating all of my favorite parts of the Star Wars galaxy, along with my versions of a couple new places I want to visit, for a massive role-playing Star Wars campaign I'm going to be starting maybe in a couple of months, but also for playing Star Wars Legion on and Shatterpoint. I put a lot of work into all these builds. I've worked in movies and I've been to a lot of film sets, and they've always inspired me to make and create, and I always want a film set quality to my tables and my gaming experience, because I really love how tabletop gaming gives you agency and makes you become an active participant in the world you're playing in. And I've always wanted to go to Jabba's Palace. I've always wanted to go to Bright Tree Village on Endor. I've wanted to visit Echo Base, and building these sets to this level makes me have a bigger and deeper appreciation of the films, and they get better every time I watch them because I'm looking for every detail. And I do all of this through kit bashing. I am a kit bashing fiend. I have collected stuff since my childhood to kit bash with, and now that I get more than just a couple dollars a week for pocket money, I spend what hobby money I have on eBay raids of old G.I. Joe ships and anything, even, Paw Patrol toys, anything I can find that I can rip up and re-glue and texturize and paint and glue 1,000 other things to. And a lot of this is on my YouTube channel. Here's an Echo base that I did from foam and kit bashing and all those swell G.I. Joe eBay items. And in that vein, I've used this Build Big Bot Bash challenge as an opportunity to further populate these worlds I'm building. Here's the final result of the robot. It's a massive scrapper pitdroid that is helping a hut in a pod racer, because I've wanted to build my own pod racers for a long time, and this accidentally became an opportunity for me to make all of those pod racers. I wanted a massive welding, quirky sort of looking pod racer repairman that was as big in personality and scale and life as huts themselves, because they've got a lot of work ahead of them to make any sort of engine carry that big green ass of a hut. I wanted to put all sorts of painting challenges like rust and fading chipped paintwork, and glowing electricity and fire and all sorts, sand into this build. So I used it as a big challenge, and I made the pod racers first. In fact, what I did when I started here was go into my storeroom, and over the years, I've tried to keep as organized as I can in my scrap build challenges to myself. And I have a couple of crates that have been funneled down into the sci-fi crates from all the offcuts and scraps and G.I. Joe stuff that I build. I never throw out anything because you never know when it's going to become useful. So I emptied those big crates, and learning from what I learned from Adam Savage in terms of knolling, I shuffled those piles into smaller piles and kept cherry picking till I ended up with a container. And since I'm trying to figure out how I can make one pod racer, I'm knolling all of the bits I have that could be a pod racer engine. And this set me off on a 2-week tangent, which Bill contacted me a month before we needed this video completed, and I thought, yeah, a droid in a month, no problem. But when I started to see how can I make one pod racer for some glory shots of the pit droids I'm making working on that pod racer, I started knolling all the bits I have together and realized, man, I've got quite a few pod racers here, and I got super excited. And here's a peek at the end result. This is the Ortolan pod racer, the blue elephant from Jabba's Palace, created by Phil Tippett. And those are the pods seen outside the Mos Eisley Space Cantina in the first film. This is my take on the Ugnaughts after the fall of the Empire, raiding what was in those buildings and flying out on it. And here's the Ithorian, my personal favourite species in the galaxy, originally designed by Ron Cobb. And this is also probably my favourite pod racer that I made out of these 6 that I ended up finishing. Here's a fun little Ewok pod racer, propelled by 2 pods from the jettisoned ships after the Battle of Endor and some ex-speeder bikes. This is the Hutt pod racer, the biggest, chunkiest one, because it's got to drag that hut along. I went with a yellow theme, I'm calling it the Yellow Belly. And here's the Gamorreans. This is the Red Baron. It's a pretty slick looking thing for a Gamorrean. Really happy with how that turned out. And if you're interested in about an hour's worth of making of content of how I built these pod racers, you can check out my Patreon, where I've uploaded all of the making of videos there, along with about 70 other tutorials. I've also had professionally sculpted some digital heads, all of my favourite species, and I'll be continuing this series and uploading these for my Patreon members to get for free if you want to do these kitbashes. Grands, Ortolans, Ithorians, Gamorreans, and of course these Ortolans, sculpted just the original way that Phil Tippett intended them in Return of the Jedi before Kenner misread it and gave them an extra pair of limbs. They're some of my favourite things that I've got to my tabletop so far, and you can find those on my Patreon. Right, off to the shops. I ordered online for this particular challenge several boxes of kits that some I'd used before and knew what was in them, some I hadn't, but getting an idea of what I wanted to make a robot out of, having knolled all of my bigger science fiction crates down to its last pieces. And I'm going through every little sprue that I've saved over all the miniatures I've brought over the years, and I'm cutting out all of the bits that may help me on this robot kit bashing challenge for Bill Make stuff. I mean, here's a bunch of just handlebars left over from the sprue of the speeder bikes from Asmodee. Here's the Spider Droid kit. I've never brought it before because I don't like the prequels, but I ended up buying 2 just for this build because I was impressed with these legs. And I'm going to glue together, not glue fully together, but just the hands and legs and bits from this Warhammer 40k robot. Now, off to the model store again because I've become obsessed and hungry for extra bits. And I've brought this Warhammer, what are they called? Adeptus Mechanicus Customarians. And I've used that kit before, and they've just got lots of grubby little hydraulic and dangly wire bits. It's beautiful stuff. So, off to Bill's Junkbot generator. As a conceptual designer, challenges help me, so I rolled twice because I'm a glutton for punishment. For the head, I got It Doesn't Look Right and Fishbowl. For the body, I got Rust God and Beanpole. For the arms, I rolled Hydraulic and Too Many. For the hands, Grip and Scorcher. That's going to really come in handy for the welding part. In fact, it inspired the whole welding part. Nice pins on the legs, as well as triple jointed. That's where that Mechanicus kit came in handy. And then for flavour, Beaten and Weirdo, which, you know, is exactly what I would love. I loved every single thing that I got, even though it's double hard to do it. So first, I just threw out a sketch pad. And this isn't, you know, my best work. It's not something I'm going to sell or frame or anything like that. But I just wanted a quick sketch to guide me. I often did this even before photoshopping the BFG for Spielberg or a troll for Guillermo or a dwarf for Peter Jackson. There's something about the freeness of drawing just on paper where you don't care, which gives you an end result that I just decided to stick to and aim for. So plunking together different bits out of my bits box, I've got a Games Workshop robot torso and this weird spider sort of droid from I don't even know what company. It's from like a swap meet. I got a bunch of these guys. I never thought I'd use them, but you never know when, and they came in handy because I wanted a big bot for my big bot bash, and a lot of robots basically thumb-sized, and I wanted this to be the biggest Star Wars droid there was. So I started putting bits together. I'm using boiling water here because a lot of board game quality boxed miniatures, once they're not Games Workshop plastic, but kind of Cool Mini or Not stuff, if you put it in boiling water, you can cut through it like a tomato instead of cut throwing it like a piece of steel and breaking your blade and cutting your fingers and stuff. So when I want big cuts through chunky bits of plastic, that's what I do. Or even precision cuts with a scalpel in other miniatures and smaller kitbashes. Now I'm drilling, precise diameter connection points. So not only can this stick together freehand, but it's going to make gluing it together really, really solid. And I can let go of that, and that's actually holding itself together because I used the right drill bit. See, now I'm doubling the size of the torso, which is going to give it that. I kind of want this. You can see from the pencil sketch, I want this awkward Hellboy proportions where it's bandy legs and a massive kind of triangular frame and broad shoulders. And I'm trying to find that by combining several, what would already be considered quite large robots in tabletop gaming. And I'm putting two of those together to make a quite large robot. And hey, look, while I'm doing it, because the box gave me two robots, I may as well make two at the same time. And that's the only reason I've got two pitdroids here, is because I've got the components for two. I may as well do it at the same time. And now I'm trying to find that forearm look that the dice have burdened me with. And I liked how that secondary white torso gave me the spot, even though it's turned backwards, for an additional pair of arms, which I want to be smaller so it's not too confusing visually in silhouette, and it also looks like they serve a different purpose. So again, I'm going back to the kind of precision drill part in advance before I've glued on pieces so it doesn't unconnect it with the vibrating of the drill, kind of thinking ahead about where I'm going to potentially use wires or different plastic parts to connect them for extra strength. And now I get to show you the beauty of these spider droid leggy bits. Look how complicated they are. That's tricky to kitbash, but they've got that little nub in the end, which is perfect, drill diameter. And they just gave me so much room to play with how arms are going to look really weird and quirky but still have a function. And every single one, annoyingly so, is actually at a different angle, so there's no double ups on it. So I should have brought two boxes from the start, but I ended up buying an additional box after I used a lot on a pod racer. Here's me playing around with the head to see if I can use that head on the robot. This is all about play and getting excited. I just felt in the end it was too drastically out of scale. A big body with a big head didn't feel right. A big body with a small head is how you make something look huge. So as a conceptual designer, as fun as that was working out, it wasn't the robot I was aiming for or that I drew. So I put that idea aside and I went on to trimming the superfluous bits I didn't need before gluing on this beautiful little bit of tech onto that arm bit for a really awkward but long extended gangly arm. And then you stick that big fat butty hand on top of that and you're starting to get a rickety puppet looking robot. I was stoked with how this all came out. And those are massive legs for the spider droid. And so doubling the torso is finally what's making that work as an arm for a regular looking scaled up robot. Now I'm using these Mechanicus parts here. That's a full leg for a character, but I'm cutting that up and only using that entire leg just as an additional little robotic hydraulic part of the forearm, because I wanted to bulk the forearm out a little bit. Again, I'm looking for those Hellboy proportions that I really like, and I was enjoying in my illustration that I'm slowly aiming towards. Now I've glued two more of those legs together, trimming them up, and I'm going to stick that right in the neck hole. I don't want to fill that neck hole up. There's some good visual depth there. But by gluing these two legs together and then gluing them in that slot, I've created a really weird, quirky Earthworm Jim looking neck piece that is only able to create a look like that by keeping that massive comical hollow open with this quirky, spindly neck part. Now I'm trying to fix that negative gap that's been created in the back by those two pieces that shouldn't have been glued together, but I glued them together, and now I want that back bit filled up visually, silhouette wise, but I still want to keep a lot of that negative space because it makes it look weak and kitbashed and malfunctioned, and an island of Dr. Moreau robot, if you will. So rather than just sculpt a massive chunk, I'm just filling that visual space with a direct line that keeps the negative space as well. And I'm just cutting up gun parts that came additional with the Mechanica set, and I'm using those to look kind of like hydraulic holdings. And now I'm looking how I create the base of this head. So I'm cutting off the spare hands I didn't use from the Games Workshop robots. And then I'm going to use that Tau probe droid cap thing and create sort of like I'm getting a slack-jawed hick feel out of this, and I'm really liking it. So I'm going to make sure that kind of, I suppose it's the jaw now, isn't it? I'm gluing that onto the neck and getting that set up. And I'm scraping flat the bottom of that headpiece, gluing it on top of that. And I'm getting the feeling from those jutty bits at the bottom of an overbite of kind of chonky robotic teeth. I could have painted it as eyes. I thought about it, but I'm enjoying that kind of quirky overbite. So now I'm cutting out arms from the Mechanica set because they've got this weird knobbly mechanical look to them that I've never seen in anything else. And I'm using these as the small secondary arms as part of my brief. I've got the mini arms, and I think that's looking really, really great and really functional. And so let's find those some hands. The Mechanica set comes with these really creepy, spindly hands. Here I am going back and flirting with the idea of using this head again, but maybe upside down, which I don't. But here I have gone and brought 2 new boxes. Here's a whole box of these stupid prequel cartoon droids that I've never used before, but I'm buying that whole box just for their shields because I've had an idea about a welding mask. And I've gone and brought more of those legs because they worked so well, but I was only left with 2 or 3 of them after my pod race build, so I had to buy a whole new box because just the ideas flew just by having 2. And as you can see, that box got me all of their arms and all of their legs, and it's expensive, but this Kitbash video was important to me, and just that hydraulic gangly look that was really so successfully extending their scale in a really visually cohesive way was important to me. And the box was about $50 New Zealand, which I think is about $1.50 American if you want to convert that. And so I'm gluing that into the arm there. The arm's got 3 or 4 joints now, but it still looks like it works. That's what part of extending the forearm with it Mechanica's hydraulic part was about, was making that the through line of elbow to wrist look a bit more practical and realistic, and connecting that big fat glove. And now I need some big fat feet, so we've got these big 70s looking kind of pauldron feet, and thanks to that ball joint that's been created by Games Workshop there, I took out what I had glued and I was able to ankle position them way more easily by tilting it, since I focused on the body before I glued anything to the base, because the angle of those spider droid hydraulic legs was going to really predict where their feet would end up, so I didn't want to lock them to a base so soon. Now I'm tidying up my workspace there and knolling the last pieces down into the more usable pieces, so it's easier to focus, and just having it in a box lid is easier to finger about. It's kind of like when you have all your Lego in a pile as a kid. I'm just making that pile a bit more accessible and getting my best bits. Now that I've got a clearer picture of what bit goes where and how I want this to look, I'm going over both of them and replicating that extra forearm look. And then again, I'm putting all of my choice cuts. I'm narrowing and narrowing down to the final touches, and so it's manageable for me. I'm putting all my pieces in a pile in smaller, more manageable piles and looking at what can be added where. And I've decided that I want those smaller arms to serve a purpose, and in the same way that in James Cameron's Aliens, those guys have those big kind of guns slung off their backs. These guys would have that, but it would be welding equipment for ripping up scrap and finding choice pieces to recreate into pod races. To do that, I found 2 of these springy little Necromunda pieces from some old kit from who knows where that were out of my bigger knolling pile. gluing in a couple extra IG88 arms into the cavity, so I have 2 points of connection. You'll see that a lot with my kitbashes. As long as there's 2 points of connection, it's going to be sturdy and it's not going to break. Now these are 2 legs off the little weird chicken walker things that come in the core set of Star Wars Legion. I've brought about 3 of them for kit bashing and extra pieces and whatnot, and because each walker has 2 and they're at different angles, I was able to incorporate that into the idea of this mechanical welding screen that would come down in front of the face of the robot, which of course is hilarious because they're not humans, their meat's not going to get seared, their eyeballs aren't going to get burnt out, so it's kind of a little comedy play. But the idea of using welding masks, when I saw those clear plastic shields of those assassin droids, it was just too tempting, and it was an expensive addition, but it was fun, and I think it added a lot of character to these robots. And so now I'm just putting in the work to screw and plug and secure the welding gear that serves the purpose of those additional 2 arms, as well as the back arm that flaps down the screen in front of their face. And once you glue in a couple pieces, you kind of realize that looks good, but it looks a bit flimsy. Mechanically, this would look more realistic if it had more of a support to it. And it's about carrying those contours of the upper torso into that bulky upside down triangle look that I want. So anytime I lose that, I find ways of recreating it by placing whatever bits work over that that negative space to capture that triangular form, and that was made easier by having all those pieces in front of me sorted out, and knowing that I needed 2 of each impacted the build and influenced the build. I'm gluing this hand down now to make it look like it is controlling that welding machine. Later on, I actually cut that off because the silhouette that it created was too confusing, and I really wanted to show that it was an arm. So that little Rebel chicken walker thing comes with alternate gun options, and they're quite big, so I've used them to look like, they're welders or flamers or some kind of like laser arc welder sort of thing. They've been really handy, so I'm gluing those where I can and gluing them into the space of the hand so it looks like the hand's using them like a joystick. Now I'm visually adding sort of a neck waddle to this dorky robot by adding a dangling sort of wire. It's Games Workshop plastic, so I'm able to bend it, but only to a point, otherwise it's going to break, and you're going to have to go to the trouble of re-gluing and maybe using some milliput. But I really think it effectively added that goiter neck waddle to the robot, because I really want the weirdo look as rolled in the Bill Make Stuff chart. Now that I've found the robot, I'm going to glue him to a base and go from there. And thanks to the ball joints of those feet, I was able to prop him up against something once the glue set and find a really natural angle for those ankles to roll straight onto a flat base. That was an added bonus of using those robots from Games Workshop, which I hadn't brought before. So the Mechanicus pack comes with all these great dangly bits, and I mean, if you cut them and apply them properly, and then of course if you paint them black, they look like all the tubes and innards of mechanical things in the Star Wars galaxy, as long as they're black. And so I want these guys to look like they're ripping the guts out of droids and ex-speeders and stuff to cannibalize them into their own crappy robots or pod racers. In the world I'm setting my gameplay in for my players and all of my Star Wars Legion game, it's about 10 years after the fall of the Empire, and it is a scrappers free-for-all, so I want to show that in this model. This little snowtrooper has this awesome flamethrower, and I love it, but I'm going to have to break it off because I've only got one. It comes from a toy of the Dark Trooper from Mandalorian that my father-in-law brought me for Christmas one year. I lost the other flame, but I just really want this build to look great, so I've repurposed it. I've upcycled. Here's a bazooka from some, Roger robot from the prequels that I don't like or need, but if you bend it, I'm making it look like it's just some broken piece of space innards, which I can paint to suit that purpose later on. But You'll never think it's a bazooka once you see it finished. And now I'm figuring out how that welding shield, that ridiculous, unnecessary welding shield's going to go. And to further the look of that being ripped out of something, I'm adding some space wires. Again, once they're painted black, it's going to look like it's straight out of the Star Wars universe. Now that flame is in the right position, I'll break it off in aid of painting, and I'll glue it back on right at the end. There's a gap between this guy's foot, so I'm trying to create some elements on their base. I don't like bases that are too over the top because it always seems like they're in the same place when you move them around the table. But just to show what this guy's up to, I'm leaving a little debris of scrap on either side of their bases that make it look like they're just ripping and dropping stuff up. These are basically Star Wars robot trolls, and this is their offal, the guts of different droids. And those wires work again there on whatever that Kitbash droid bit is. That's a bit of old Ninja Turtle Mauser droid I'm using there. Cut its head off, slap in some of those wires, and now it visually marries up to the head it's pulled off in the above hand. Now, milliput, I can't do a kitbash without it, and a lot of my terrain, this is kind of the backbone to it. It's a simple two-part epoxy, and it works really well with a couple of dentist tools, watercolor paintbrush. Right now I've just made a sausage snake with my fingers. I'm rolling it into the area that I want to flesh out. I want to make the top part of that grey robot meet a little bit more fluidly in with the white part, so when it's painted up it doesn't look like I've glued two different things together. It's more of a factory sort of made robot looking sculpt. So I'm just finding those shapes with the dentist tools, my fingerprint, the firmness of how I press my finger down, and a watercolor brush, and that is a needle wrapped in a whole bunch of other milliput and stuff. And I'm just finding those really hard to find robotic forms. That's why I'm not doing too much steel objects with it, but you can see how well it works for organic stuff like the mounds that I'm putting onto the base there that will be kind of an undershape for the sand I'm going to glue on top of that to show that this guy's in kind of a pit, I guess, just the desert or a pod hanger. So after a heavy application of the PVA glue, I'm just sprinkling some sand on there. I live next to a beach, so this isn't hard for me to find. And once that dries, you're going to put a big globby second coat of that glue on there, and that's going to give it a kind of a plastic Toyota quality. You're going to take that out, leave that in the sun for a while. Here's my studio's private little Ewok balcony, and here's my studio's private little Ewok called Upper. And now I am in a pretty good spot. I think pretty much the kit bashing phase has been done. Everything's glued and ready to go for that paint job. That I'm going to worry about fussing about with those shields later on. But here you can see the difference between just one big coat of brown. And I'm starting with brown because I want this to be a rusty guy as per the brief I rolled. And rusty is messy, so we're going to start with that first, and it's going to give us a really good idea of what we're going to start painting over that rust, i.e. steel or paint jobs. While we're doing the broad strokes, I'm going to lay down the first coat of the sand as well. Now I'm choosing some panels to be a yellow color to match the pod racer, and putting the rust wash over the yellow as well as the brown really worked, and I want to match these droids to that pod racer. So here's a little example of how I'm going to go ahead and paint that in a clearer way. There's the brown base coat, and then I've mixed up kind of a wet palette of this yellow color. It's an off yellow, Balor brown, and once I've dabbed some of that on, I just cover it with blobs of water, which looks a bit it looks like a bad paint job, honestly, but that's what we're going for. I've accidentally created this little sad, happy yolk egg face. Please kill me. Oh, every moment I leave is pain. But while that's kind of doing its thing and you leave it in the sun for a while, you can see here it's dried and it's created this really patchy, faded wash look. And I did that process over all of these key parts of the robot that I felt would be the factory car door, or the bonnet, if you will, of this build once it came off the line many decades ago on a nicer planet than where it's ended up. And now I've got those two central colors defined, the brown rusty base, or just the brown steel base, and the yellow cabinet finish to it. I'm going to apply a rusty wash, which is this orangey brown. It's kind of one part brown, one part just tap water. Of course, it's tap water. It's like you're going to use sparkling for this. Anyway, I'm applying that wash over everything. Big, broad brush, but not too broad because you don't want to make sure you've missed an area. And here's the difference between those two now. It's really tied those two quite different colors closer together in a kind of a palette sense, which is how aging works. You see how good that looks now that it's dry? This is, I mean, it looks pretty film set already, but now it's really popping and explaining all of these other details in a much clearer way for me to see what I want to pop out. And the first thing I guess I really want to do is pick these steel parts. And so this is the great thing about having two. I can give you a comparison here, and I can see how my progress is going. And this is, you can see all the little lead belcher steel parts I've chosen to pop. Now I'm using the back of my hand to kind of get a dry level of paint on my brush. It's called dry brushing. You've all heard of it. I'm just putting a highlight over that layer of sand, so that dries, ready for a sepia wash I'm going to put over it. While that's drying, I went ahead and painted everything that is a tube. In Star Wars, all the kind of tubes are black. So as soon as you throw some black tubes on something scientific looking, you get kind of quite a ways ahead to that Star Wars look that I'm after. Here's the sepia wash. And just a big sloppy generous coat of that everywhere, and then I'm using my finger to just smush off the top coat of that while it's still drying. This is going to just give it a little extra depth and save me having to do a second highlight pass afterwards. And that's going to dry a bit glossy, so I end up using a matte concrete gloss to take some of that down. But once you put the black edges on those bases, which is a bit ahead of itself, but it gives you that visual progress of this thing really starting to look good. I'm getting excited about that. So now I'm doing kind of a one part sepia to a 1 part earthrax wash, because I find earthrax sometimes is just too rich, and I'm applying that to every bit of metal that I painted on before, and this is pulling that big shiny steel color palette back into that central brown base where we're starting from, because again, this is all about keeping this guy aged. Now here's a paint I brought for the pod racer electricity, and I thought it would be kind of a nice visual connection point between these guys and the pod racers to look like they're almost powered by that same pulsing pink light that is propelling X-Wings and pod racers across the galaxy. And I painted a silver first and then that on top, so it kind of has its own kind of glow. Now I'm just painting the colors of the droids at their bases. I'm going for light grays and whites, so they really stand out as parts not from themselves, which are yellow and brown. It really looks like they're ripping up other objects. Now I'm applying the same brown and then rust coat to what's going to become their visors. Now see this guy's all silvery and chipped. This is a long process. I think it took about a day and a half to paint both of these with just this technique. While I did that, I had my young apprentice, James, over, and he helped me base all of my backlog of unbased miniatures for the shoot ahead of how I'm going to showcase these pod racers and all of my pitdroids at the end of the video for you, and all of my kitbashed NPCs. He came over for 2 days while I finished these bots and was very helpful. So with your smallest possible brush, mediating the amount of paint you've got at the very tip of it, I'm highlighting and going around all of the happy accidents that came with that kind of watercolor smudgy paint pass that left all of these dodgy dollops. Now I'm highlighting those and letting them guide where I'm painting, and then I'm just hitting all of the edges over the brown rust parts as well. A real scraped up manky bot. You can see here how I'm trying to almost just illustrate these scratches on, and I do that over the whole thing, and it took forever. And it's pretty exhausting, but the end result is so rewarding, and it really ties everything together and makes the sculpt. Now I'm gluing together the visors, and now that it's all painted, it's time to stick that flame on, which is an exciting end result. It's come out pretty good. I wish I had time to maybe put some light my bricks LEDs in it, so make that fire pop. Maybe I'll do that in the future, but for now I'm really happy with how these came out. I think they stayed pretty close to my design. The eyeballs on the top, which were from the two spider droid sets I got, gave me a frog look instead of kind of a snail muddy mud skipper look that the illustration had, that I hadn't planned for because I didn't know I was going to get these eyes, and that's what kit bashing is, really. I love how dorky and overbite they look, and I love how excited they look in their work. And I thought I'd show you a glimpse into the world those two robots are going to be inhabiting. I am setting it in a 10 years after the fall of the Empire. There's Empire scrap everywhere, so it's kind of like Mad Max Star Wars world. It's a scrapper's dream, and everyone is incorporating ex-military vehicles into their land roving marketplaces. Really, this is a marketplace meeting up in some barren wasteland, sharing wares and scrapper parts, really. Because these are all scrapper pod racers and scrapper droids, I'm trying to create the visual world around them where everything is just being built out of miscellaneous crap with, coats of paint slapped over it. This is my Ugnaught pod racers. Now, they don't have pit droids per se because they don't trust them, or they know that they're better mechanics than them, but they've built themselves these mech suits out of droids to handle the work of repairing and scrapping. Here's a little junk bar. Here's a little, you can see they're quite fish orientated. This is a Stingray looking scrapper made from a G.I. Joe vehicle and lots of other things. Again, G.I. Joe vehicle. I wanted my scrapper markets to kind of look like a coral reef at feeding time. So you create this world where all of these little things are flittering about, scurrying, and the ships themselves bring a life to it as though they're almost sentient, which of course they're not, but it's just a nice visual direction to go through. So highlighting that through fins and tail shapes and bigger sized heads. And then I had a fun time. I really loved Ray's bike in that first sequel movie. And so I've emulated that a few times just by kitbashing a whole bunch of miscellaneous stuff together. Find an interesting robot shape and then stick some propulsions at the back of it, a couple fins, and a Star Wars Legion size seat and steering wheel on top of it, and you can get some really interesting speeders. This is made out of a gun and a G.I. Joe jet ski and other parts. They're just great for scatter terrain, and you can also, I guess, agree early on that if you can get a miniature in it or something, you can get to it and ride somewhere on the board if you have some sort of object markers like that. Here's my favorite. That's an Ortelian fish market. It's like a seafood restaurant that floats around. And like this one, I love the Fifth Element. Who doesn't, with that Chinese restaurant that comes to Dallas Corbin's door. So this is kind of like a little shop that comes out and folds out and gives you your wares right up to your ship. And obviously there's a big tortoise-themed vehicle, which is perched on the back of this ship with that robot pirate. It's 3 vehicles that dock together to make one big pirate ship. There's like a bat shape on the front of it. This is one of those walkers from the Clone Wars, for Kenner-sized toys that I repurposed because it's perfect size for Legion, and it has an interior. And then here's the Ugnaughts. These are just their wasteland walking scrappers where they can detect and pull scrap straight out of the sand. You've seen chicken walkers. Well, there's a rooster walker. Had fun with that one. And here's their kind of bionic droid repurposed mech suits like an Alien. To do the heavy lifting and the repairs on ships and scraps and pod races. And what kind of marketplace would be complete without the merchants? And these are just kitbashed out of all these different board games, from Simon to all different sort of Kickstarters I've brought. Realised I'm not going to get around to playing that game, and I'm more addicted to the kitbashing anyway. So, Rum and Bones, Games Workshop, Ghostbusters, there's all sorts of stuff in there. And here's my little nod to Charles Dickens. There's kind of a Fagin and a Bill Sykes with his pickpocket orphans, which will be great characters to throw into a market situation. And then here's all the creeps that are at the market. Anything I feel like I can turn into something from Star Wars, I can't help myself, and I do a lot of milliput sculpting over other miniatures just to create NPCs, because game companies don't create NPCs. Everybody's got a gun and they're running around in a pose, and I want to fill my worlds that I play in with characters. So here are the Ortolans at a different scrap market at a different part of the galaxy. Some Jawas have turned up to trade their wares. I've got all these Nemoidian mechanics that you can park your car up, and it's like a used car shop, scrap dealers that the Jawas have showed up to, which is a perfect place for an Ortolian pod racer to get those right parts to win the next big race with. So you got Jawas trading with Nemoidians and Ortolians. These are some of my favourite kitbashed robots. They're from all over the place, including Legion, but also Smog from Simon. Here's my Ortolans that you've seen before. I put a lot of work into art directing these so they came exactly like the movie, and then just some cool different poses so I could get a unit out of them. You can find those on my Patreon soon. Here's some Jawas. They're 3D printed because, again, they don't make these yet. I'm really happy with how the paint job came out for these. What Star Wars without Jawas? And then here's my Nemoidians. I used a lot of the heads from the just Rebel main core set and built up these guys myself to just look like pit crew. Now let's go to a Gamorrean scrapyard. This place looks like a real crap hole because, pig people live there. The Gamorrean pod racer, I think, was going to be the only one I built for this video, and I ended up building 6, but I just knew I had those 2 engines, and they were the pod racer I was most excited about. Turns out to not even be my favourite one now. But the Gamorreans I have kitbashed over the kill team of orcs from 40k. I did put a lot of work into increasing their body length and obviously the work around their furry undies and their faces. But yeah, I'm happy with how they turned out, and you can grab their heads again on my Patreon. Here we go. So that's me using there's 2 different shades of milliput in there, just to help you see how you could let one bit dry and then work up the next. And they're a lot of fun. I just gave them big cartoony jaws because at the end of the day I thought I love how orcs looked, and I kind of really wanted a middle ground between 40k orcs and Gamorrean guards because I'm going to start playing a Star Wars campaign of Kill Team with these. And yeah, it just, just went with Gamorrean guard colours over the Games Workshop themed clothes, and you know what they are, they pop, they look like they're kind of meant to be there. Really nice model set. And yeah, I wanted their droids to be a bit different, so you got these death looking scrapyard detectorists, and then those floating droids, and now we're in the swamps of Ithorian. I wanted the Ithorian droids to not look humanoid. I wanted them to look like Ithorians. And my kitbashed Ithorian models that have been put over a Kroot killer team pack, that splash of red that Mom Nadon from the first Star Wars cantina, you see him for like 3 seconds, and from childhood he became my favourite Star Wars alien. And his colour palette of costume really pops them in their little tree houses. So how I made these is, as I said, there's the Kroot kill team, and I had these heads modelled up, and then I 3D printed them out, and I gave them, the ones that didn't have capes, which was about 5 of them, I gave them capes and sculpted around their necks, and then I used actually grains of rice for their toes and sculpted those in so their feet looked more Ithorian. But the hands on these models from Games Workshop is so great, and the skinniness and the poses and the costumes, I just fell in love with this pack, so I enjoyed incorporating it into my tabletop for Legion, and these will be part of my Star Wars themed Kill Team campaign I'm going to be playing as well. Probably my favourite models on my shelf at the moment. I'm really proud of how these guys came out. And I've got tutorials as well on my Patreon of how I made those swamp trees. They're for my Gloaming campaign, but perfect for Dagobah and Ithoria as well. And here's their robots. As I said, I wanted these droids to feel like Ithorians had made them, and Ithorians look kind of like that. And that was a fun challenge. It made out of all sorts of, mainly Star Wars Legion components. Right, now let's go from the jungles of Ithoria to the forests of Endor. Here's a quick little look on what it takes me to pack down modularly. This is about 12 minutes, sped up to about 1 minute, but everything I make is modular. Everything I design and build and record tutorials for on my Patreon is all modular components, hand sculpted, handcrafted. Some of it is from 3D prints that I have designed and figured out how to make for printable scenery. And I take the stuff I do for printable scenery and I just make it how I want it to be, which is obviously in an impossible to print sort of way. So sometimes it's about 20% printable scenery and the rest is all hand sculpted with milliput and balsa wood, as you can see from my Ewok village. But more importantly, here is the Ewok pod racer. I love the idea that all of these pods would be crashing into Endor after that battle in the space with all those ships and the Death Star exploding. And the whole new world has opened up to the Ewoks, a world of technology that they're still wrapping their head around. So though they've joined the Pod Race League, they've done it in kind of a hokey introduction to engineering way. And they've still kept their flair on it, like their gliders. And you can't have an Ewok pod racer without Ewok pitdroids. These little guys were made out of the Mechanicus set and spare droid parts from the Rollers and Roger Roger droids from the core set, which is prequel based, which I just used for cannibalizing parts. And I've 3D printed all these Ewoks. They're such good sculpts. I think it's from Skullforge. They're so chonky, and it really looks like a little person can fit into that costume, which is important to me visually. And now you've seen this already. This is my Huttese pod racing circuit. So I made all of the Hutt Lords for my campaign because in the vacuum of power that Jabba's deaths creates, I can't imagine all the other Hutts swarming in to maintain what is theirs, and there are no models for that, so I had to custom kitbash all of those, as you can see them in the background. And they're getting ready to, I guess, watch their boss go in a race and cheer him on. This is them finalizing the last little bits of their racer before taking it to the stadium. Looks like a pretty smoky, evil-looking contraption. Here's for scale, I've put in some smaller droids just to see how big my bots are for the Big Bot Bash. They're massive. I'd love to see those in a film. And here is just me having Kitbash ridiculous fun, making who I think would inhabit, a world of Hutts. I don't want to make all of them fat because I imagined Jabba the Hutt was kind of like Marlon Brando, and I like the idea that there'd be all sorts of shapes and sizes in the same way that you get with human beings. Danny DeVito is the same species as Michael Jordan, and I wanted to kind of get that across with these Hutts. And a lot of it was, a lot of their bases are built from Ghostbuster aliens and Hate giants from the Simon Hate game. And I've just used propulsor lifts to make it look like, they're floating around, but I've made them pretty tough. And here's my take on baby Rancors. They're almost like tadpoles forming as they feed and get older. He's got a bunch of romp rats on him. And that more or less wraps up this kind of sneak peek into my world. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video if you have. And if you are interested in my builds and a backlog of, as I say, there's 142 posts on my Patreon, and about 75 of those are kind of 17 to half-hour long video tutorials that I've been doing for the last 2 years. Built up a huge backlog of stuff, which is between my Star Wars builds and my kind of medieval fantasy builds. So we've got Jeddah, which I built over Jabba's palace. I've got full tutorials on how I do the miniatures and the characters and the levels. I do reversible tables, so there's two tables in every gaming table I make. One side is fantasy, one side science fiction. I worked in the film industry in the miniatures department on King Kong, so I use a lot of foam rock. I also talk about the movies I worked on, like Portable Door, turning Sam Neill into a goblin, and I give you exclusive looks into my process as a conceptual designer on movies, like that, and the BFG for Spielberg. I've got my own line of garden gnomes. I show you how I hand sculpt my garden gnomes, my scenery, my trips to Adam Savage's Tested, where I'm featured as the show's regular guest. My D&D campaigns, my medieval fantasy castles and ruins and shires and Faskelian turtle monsters with shops on their backs. Everything I've designed, everything I've hand sculpted, everything I've painted myself. And for years since my first tested video, people have been messaging me a lot about how I make trees. So I've got quite a lot of tree making tutorials. You would have seen some of them in Endor and Ithoria back there. If you want to know how I make those, there's plenty of videos in the backlog there, and I'm just about to start a huge new other one, as well as finishing off 2 more swamp tree terrain pieces. So yeah, I want to thank you all for watching, and thank you for your interest, and thanks to Bill for inviting me to do this. It was a great opportunity for me to just lose myself full-time in a Kitbash for a while and actually get a couple projects out the way, like those pod races. And most of all, I just want to thank all of my patrons who for the last 2 years have made builds to this level possible and accessible for me, and kind of kept me documenting my process, which I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. I definitely wouldn't have done. And I found it really rewarding, and I've really enjoyed sharing with my small crew of mates on there and their feedback and seeing their builds too. So yeah, that's it. Thanks again. I hope you got a lot out of the video, and happy gaming.